with the me bounce thing, y'all ate that up. Because rebounds, me bounce, creep bounce, key bounce, T bounce, C bounce, anything that comes off that board, it's mine.
In professional basketball, there's one unforgivable sin that gets exposed faster than bad shooting nights or blown defensive rotations. And that sin is believing the franchise owes you more than you owe the franchise. Angel Reese is learning that lesson the hard way in Chicago. Because when the noise finally dies down and the marketing slogans fade, organizations always reveal what they truly value through action, not words. And the Chicago Sky just delivered the loudest action possible by publicly crowning Camila Cardoso as their Player of the Year, a decision that wasn't just about statistics or availability but about accountability, reliability, and respect for the game itself, and the timing of it was surgical, almost ruthless, because it landed directly after Reese chose to air out her frustrations in the media like a frustrated executive rather than a developing professional athlete, effectively positioning herself as both victim and judge while forgetting that professional locker rooms run on trust, not ego. This wasn't some harmless venting session or misunderstood quote taken out of context. This was a full-blown public evaluation of teammates, coaches, and roster construction. Broadcast to the world as if the people grinding next to her every night were disposable obstacles rather than professionals fighting for their livelihoods. And once that line is crossed, there is no rewinding the tape, no clarifying tweet, no post-game smile that can undo the damage. Because teammates remember who stood with them when things were ugly and who pointed fingers when accountability came knocking. Reese didn't just question the roster, she questioned the worth of the people wearing the same.
Plans on remaining with the Chicago Sky after Rocky in the 2025. You may be like, Rocky question mark? Yeah, you don't
jersey, and that alone is enough to fracture any locker room. But what made it combustible was the contradiction between her words and her actions, because while she demanded upgrades, consistency, and commitment from everyone else, she herself became the least dependable variable in the entire organization, drifting in and out of the lineup under a cloud of vague injury reports, missing critical stretches while the team fought for relevance, and simultaneously popping up across state lines for brand appearances and promotional runs, a visual that burned into the minds of fans and teammates alike, because nothing erodes credibility faster than asking others to sacrifice while you prioritize your own spotlight. The Sky front office saw it, the veterans felt it, and the younger players learned from it, and eventually the organization reached the same conclusion every serious sports operation reaches when faced with chaos. Production, professionalism, and presence matter more than hype. And that's exactly why Camila Cardoso's name ended up on that award. Because while Reese was turning post-game interviews into therapy sessions and leverage plays, Cardoso was quietly stacking evidence: 40 games played, relentless availability, consistent impact, tangible growth, and a complete absence of drama, showing up night after night, absorbing contact, anchoring the paint, earning respect not through volume but through dependability. And in a league where availability is currency, Cardoso was rich while Reese was overdraft on reputation. This award wasn't about disrespecting Reese, it was about exposing the truth she tried to outrun, that leadership isn't declared, it's demonstrated, and that franchises don't build around voices, they build around habits, the habits of showing up, staying ready, taking responsibility, and uplifting teammates rather than diminishing them. Reese thought leverage came from branding and attention. But Chicago reminded everyone that leverage comes from being indispensable on the court and stabilizing off it. And the message couldn't have been clearer if it were printed on the locker room wall. The future belongs to players who commit to the grind, not those who weaponize dissatisfaction, because once a player convinces herself that the team needs her more than she needs the team, the countdown has already started, and Chicago just let the clock be heard. The moment a locker room realizes its supposed cornerstone is more committed to controlling the narrative than controlling the game, the collapse doesn't happen quietly, it happens all at once. And Chicago became the live demonstration of how fast a franchise can rot from the inside when ego replaces accountability. What followed Angel Reese's public media tour wasn't just awkward tension or a few uncomfortable practices, it was the complete erosion of trust that professional teams rely on to survive adversity. Because basketball at this level is less about raw talent and more about reliability. and Reese unknowingly exposed herself as the most unreliable element in the entire Sky ecosystem. A player who demanded perfection from others while excusing chaos in herself, a contradiction that veterans instantly recognize and younger players quietly resent, because no amount of branding can hide the reality that winning teams are built on sacrifice, not self-preservation. Reese's comments didn't land in a vacuum. They landed in a locker room filled with professionals who had bled for this league, players who had endured losing seasons, injuries, roster churn, and organizational instability, and yet still showed up every day ready to compete, only to be told, through headlines and sound bites, that they weren't good enough to stand beside someone who herself couldn't stay on the floor. And that is where the resentment took root, because Reese wasn't just criticizing performance, she was rewriting responsibility, shifting blame outward while her own statistical profile told an unforgiving story of inefficiency, turnovers, blocked attempts, and emotional volatility. The league doesn't operate on vibes, it operates on film. And the film showed a player who struggled to finish through contact, who forced possessions, who coughed the ball up at historic rates, and who allowed frustration to override discipline, piling up technical fouls until the league itself had to intervene. And when that intervention arrived, right before a marquee matchup, the symbolism was brutal. Because the biggest stage demanded composure and Reese delivered suspension, leaving her teammates to answer questions she created while she watched from the sidelines. And that absence echoed louder than any criticism she ever voiced, because availability is the first responsibility of leadership, and she failed it repeatedly. The injury saga only magnified the distrust, because ambiguity breeds suspicion, and the Sky's endless day-to-day updates became a running joke around the league, not because injuries aren't real, but because commitment is visible. And Reese's commitment seemed selectively applied, disappearing when accountability loomed and reappearing when cameras flashed, a pattern that teammates couldn't ignore, especially when they looked down the bench and didn't see her presence during games she supposedly couldn't play, because leaders travel, leaders support, leaders stay connected even when sidelined, and Reese chose distance, choosing instead to fly for endorsements, product launches, and territory, marking soundbites that alienated the very people expected to cover for her absence on the court. That's when whispers turned into certainty inside the building, because players talk, staff talk, and front offices listen. And what they heard wasn't jealousy or insecurity, it was exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying someone else's drama while trying to save a season. And when veterans like Rachel Bannum openly admit they're over it, that's not a throwaway comment. That's the sound of a locker room emotionally checking out, and once that happens, the season is already lost no matter what the standings say. Courtney Vandersloot's forced response should have been the final warning sign, because when a championship-proven veteran has to publicly defend her value against insinuations made by a younger teammate, the hierarchy is broken beyond repair. And Vandersloot's reaction wasn't defensive, it was dignified, a masterclass in professionalism that quietly exposed the gap between real leadership and performative confidence. Because she didn't attack Reese, she defended standards, reminding everyone that excellence isn't self-proclaimed, it's earned over time through consistency and resilience, something Reese seemed impatient to develop. The front office had already bent over backward trying to accommodate Reese's demands, restructuring the roster, sacrificing future flexibility, acquiring Ariel Atkins specifically to stabilize the team and support Reese's growth, only to be rewarded with public dissatisfaction and implied threats of departure, a move that signaled entitlement rather than ambition, because true franchise players don't negotiate through interviews, they elevate internally and let results speak, and Reese chose the opposite route, burning goodwill faster than it could be replenished. Then came the most damning realization of all, the one no amount of spin could bury. Chicago played better without her, not emotionally, not symbolically, but tangibly, measurably, possession by possession, as ball movement improved, spacing clarified, and offensive decisions became simpler and more efficient, because basketball punishes chaos, and Reese's game, rushed finishes, forced shots, turnover-heavy sequences, had become chaos personified, a black hole that sucked momentum out of possessions while demanding more touches to fix the damage it caused. Leading the league in turnovers while missing significant time isn't just a bad stat, it's an indictment of decision-making. And when analysts broke down the film showing how frequently her attempts near the rim were rejected, how predictable her moves had become, and how often defenders baited her into mistakes, the myth of untouchability collapsed under the weight of evidence, leaving behind an uncomfortable truth: Reese wasn't carrying Chicago. Chicago was carrying Reese's volatility. The internal meeting players were forced to organize was the final fracture, because teams don't survive when players must police the behavior of their supposed star, and when Ariel Atkins, the very veteran Reese demanded, had to acknowledge awareness of the situation, it confirmed the dysfunction had reached the top, requiring organizational containment rather than simple conflict resolution. And head coach Tyler Marsh's admission that it was a top-down issue signaled that Reese's actions weren't being viewed as isolated comments but as a pattern of conduct detrimental to the team, a phrase organizations reserve for moments when patience has run out. The Sky were trapped between needing Reese's marketability and managing her disruption, a dangerous limbo where discipline feels performative and silence feels complicit, and eventually something had to give. And what gave was the illusion that Reese was the unquestioned future of the franchise. Naming Camila Cardoso Player of the Year was the cleanest, coldest way to end the debate, because it bypassed arguments and spoken values, rewarding presence over posturing, consistency over complaints, and professionalism over provocation. And in doing so, Chicago didn't just elevate Cardoso, they quietly downgraded Reese's standing without ever mentioning her name, a move far more devastating than public criticism, because organizations don't demote stars loudly, they do it by redirecting trust, and trust had clearly shifted. Cardoso didn't need interviews to validate her impact, her availability did that, her durability did that, her willingness to play within the system did that, and every game she showed up reinforced the message Reese refused to hear: the league doesn't owe you belief, you earn it nightly. By the time the season unraveled, Reese's attempt to force an exit became obvious, but leverage requires desirability, and desirability disappears when you're seen as unstable, unreliable, and publicly dismissive of teammates, because no front office wants to inherit a culture problem disguised as star power. No coach wants to manage entitlement masquerading as leadership, and no locker room wants to wonder who will be blamed next time adversity hits. Reese didn't just weaken Chicago's present, she complicated her own future, because the tape, the quotes, the absences, and the suspensions all travel with her, and other organizations are watching, calculating, weighing whether the upside outweighs the disruption, and that calculation is far less flattering than Reese likely imagined when she started speaking as if Chicago needed to convince her to stay. In the end, this isn't about punishment or disrespect, it's about consequences, the unavoidable outcome of mistaking attention for authority and branding for value. And the Sky's silent pivot toward Cardoso represents the league's oldest lesson resurfacing once again. Stars who show up quietly last longer than stars who speak loudly. And franchises survive not by chasing noise but by anchoring themselves to players who understand that winning begins with responsibility, not rhetoric. Here's the coldest truth professional sports never sugarcoat. The league doesn't exile you when you talk too much. It exposes you when your actions can no longer support your ego. And Angel Reese is now standing naked in that spotlight with nowhere left to hide. What Chicago has done isn't emotional, personal, or reactionary, it's strategic, calculated, and rooted in survival. Because franchises don't implode themselves for individual personalities, no matter how loud the brand or how large the following. And the Sky finally reached the point where protecting the organization mattered more than protecting a narrative that was actively poisoning their future. Reese didn't just test boundaries. She bulldozed through them repeatedly, mistaking tolerance for dependence and confusing patience with weakness. And when an organization realizes it has been negotiating with entitlement instead of nurturing growth, the response is never dramatic, it's decisive. And that's exactly what we're watching unfold in real time. Because Chicago isn't asking whether Reese wants to stay anymore. They're quietly evaluating whether keeping her makes sense at all. A shift that fundamentally alters the power dynamic she assumed was locked in her favor. The most dangerous mistake Reese made was believing the league would bend around her perception of herself rather than